Hello and welcome to the second episode of the 905 podcast, a new podcast looking at the GTA region outside central Toronto. My name is Roland and I'm here with my co-host, John MacLeod.
Hello.
This week, the big story in the news is the Ontario government came out on Thursday, right before a long weekend, with its plans for the return to school of students in September at the high schools and primary schools. And we know certainly you, Joel, as a parent with two young children, have a huge number of questions about how this is going to work. So we invited on a teacher from Halton District School Board who recently retired but was a senior teacher in our region. And this is our conversation with her. Okay, well, I'd like to welcome Cindy Cosentino, who's the first guest on the 905 podcast. Cindy has recently retired as a teacher for the Halton District School Board after 32 years of teaching both in Halton and in Hamilton, and as an elementary teacher and also a secondary teacher in science and math. She worked as an education officer at the Ministry of Education and has been a program leader in Halton for the last 10 years. Purely coincidentally, she retired just before COVID hit, but is extremely knowledgeable and experienced, and brings to the table the kind of perspective of a frontline teacher. I should mention that I know Cindy because she lent me a hand, as did her son Chris, in 2018 when I ran for municipal council here in Burlington. But I thought she would be a terrific guest, given she brings really that independent view and isn't representing either the kind of necessarily the union perspective or the school board perspective or a government perspective. And I think that's really important that we have that when discussing the plans that are happening right now. So, Cindy, obviously the government announced on Thursday their plans for returning to school in September. What are your initial feelings about what they're proposing?
I think when I saw the plan, particularly the elementary plan for a full cohort, full day, I was puzzled that in all of the work we've been doing as a community to try and deal with this virus, we know what the rules are. We know what we're supposed to be doing: 6 feet apart, stay masked, stay outside, all of the guidelines that we've been given. And this flies in the face of many of them. And I know I'm not going back into a classroom in September and won't have to be in that position, but my initial reaction was a great deal of concern for the colleagues that I've left behind who will be facing this, and the families of the students who will be in school. They will also be impacted. And just generally what we're looking at in September, October, if this experiment, because I do feel like it is an experiment, if it doesn't go well.
Yeah, and just to sort of give the background to anybody listening who like me doesn't have children in the system or it doesn't work at the school. I mean, I guess so. The plan is, if I understand right, that the younger children will go up to grade 8, so not actually that young, will go 5 days a week, like normal, basically. Yeah. And then the high school children will be kind of rotated in some way. So, yeah, it certainly occurs to me, how do you keep social distance with young children when you've got, 30, 35 in a class?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. My question to you, Cindy, is if you were going back, like, what would you be doing now to try and prepare your classroom and your teaching style for that reality? Because I can't.
I can speak to secondary on that because that's the realm I was in when I retired and left at the end of June. And that's part of the challenge, is that it really has been a moving target, and the teachers, how you teach fully online versus how you teach face-to-face versus how you teach in a blended model are all very different and require very different preparation.
Mm-hmm.
And so even knowing where to start, I mean, just finding this plan out now, 4 weeks before school starts, even that has been very stressful and challenging for people, because teachers do spend a lot of time over the summer planning. And especially this summer, I think a lot of them are trying to get ahead of their planning so that they're ready for whatever comes at them, and they didn't know what they were facing. So it's been extremely difficult to even prepare. And understandably, I mean, that's the thing that needs to be said. Nobody knows how to do this. It's not like there is a right way to do this and there's someone with that answer and they're just withholding it. But there's been a lack of direction from the ministry in terms of, and very delayed answers to things.
Well, on that note, are you still in touch with your former colleagues in the board?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And what are they saying about this situation?
There's a lot of anxiety, and I don't want to speak on their behalf, but I can say that they're very concerned. They have, I have friends who are very aware of the fact. I mean, one of the pieces of data I saw on the ministry website that they were trying to limit contacts to 50 people
mm-hmm.
in elementary and 100 in secondary. I haven't had contact with more than 4 or 5 people for 5 months. And now all of a sudden I'm going to, if I were going back, I'd be in contact with between 50 and 100 students and other staff, which means if I have elderly parents, I can no longer see them. If I have people I am supporting at home who are vulnerable at home, I'm going to be put in a difficult position.
Right.
It just changes the entire dynamic on a very personal level. I think what I'm seeing is fear, a lot of fear.
I can understand. What it seems to me is, because I mean, here at home, I have a child in elementary grades, and we've been looking at trying to do the math in our heads over this, and we just say that the social circle guidelines that came down over the summer just pretty much have to be thrown out the door, because I don't see how you can maintain that social circle of 10 people and still send your child to school and then say, yes, we'll maintain the social circle distancing rules outside of the school hours. I mean, that pretty much your school community is now your social circle, like it or not.
Yes. And I know even from the challenge, I think the bubbling concept has been difficult anyways.
Right.
I've heard a lot
obviously. Yes.
Understanding what a bubble is, and you're exclusive once you're in a bubble, and you trust that the people in your bubble are going to honor that.
Right.
Now you're trusting that 50 to 100 people are going to honor that and follow the rules. And I mean, even that they're allowing extracurriculars in secondary, sports and clubs where social distancing is possible. Well, that's, again, there you mix it up again. That's not the cohort.
Well, I mean, let's just look at that number, though, that 50 to 100 person limit as you said, at the secondary school level. How is that even possible? Because most of the high schools are built with the capacity of 1,000, in some cases 1,000 plus students in regular attendance, and even with the the cohorting that they're suggesting, if the idea is half that number is 500, maybe 750 students in some cases. Is in your mind, is it practical to say that you can limit contact to 100 people inside an Ontario high school?
I think people are going, and this is, again, a fascinating challenge, purely watching this now from the outside. People are not at work right now, and you have to re-timetable your entire school. And timetabling is a process that is extremely time-consuming, and hours and hours and hours go into timetabling. Now you've got to timetable for students who are staying home, students who are coming in. And I think it is possible to cohort the students so you have staggered entry, separated areas of the school. But to do that in 4 weeks and to be ready to go when school starts, I honestly don't know how they will accomplish that. I know the people I work with, if anyone will accomplish it, it will be the administrators and the teachers I worked with in Halton. But I can't even imagine the hours that will go into that. It's kind of, I think they'll be building the plane as it's flying, honestly, that analogy of we're figuring this out as we go, which is a very unnerving way to do business when it's something this scary.
Well, also you had, since I'll say probably since April to kind of come up with an alternative. Because that's the sense that I'm hearing from parents is that we wasted pretty much the months of April, May, June, and July to come up with an alternative. That parents were looking at the fall as something new might need to be in place, but we didn't come up with that alternative. Would you say that that's a fair assessment?
It is and it isn't. I mean, the reality with COVID is that the science is changing. I think it's easy to forget where we were in March and April. We thought contact was a huge way of transmission, and I think science is showing that is not as. I mean, I remember washing my groceries, and yes, hand washing is important, but it's not quite the method of transmission that we feared it was at the beginning. It's turning out that it's more airborne. It's what's happening in closed spaces. It's why outside is okay right now and inside is not. So I think, to be fair to everyone, we didn't really understand the disease. We still don't really have a good handle on it. So the plans have to be flexible. They have to change. But we know enough now to know that 30 kids in a classroom is not a good idea. I did not see ventilation mentioned anywhere in anything.
Actually, that's something that you can speak to, just because I know from having spoken to a number of teachers over the years that the standards, the building standards of some of our schools is not great. Just like you say, ventilation, things like windows that open, which sounds so rudimentary, but what do you feel that, I mean, from your knowledge of the kind of school buildings, what do you feel the challenges are there?
Oh, there are classrooms that don't have windows. That the rooms were built without windows. So there are no windows to open. And I would hazard a guess that the ventilation has not been measured or checked in a very long time. There just simply isn't money provided for that kind of work. So I would not feel confident that a classroom, the ventilation in a classroom, and even in a well-ventilated classroom, it's you have to look at viral load. How long are you in there? How many people are in there? And how long are you breathing the same air? It's a very technical thing to look at the circulation of air and what you're being exposed to. Is that going to happen in every classroom in Ontario? No, it's not even being mentioned. There's not a single mention of upgrades to ventilation systems. Open.
Yeah, well, and I know I always mention this because the more people know this, the better. But just about every teacher I've ever spoken to, when you say what single thing would improve your lifestyle, it's like air conditioning. But I mean, that's not a COVID related thing necessarily, but it speaks to the kind of lack of. These schools, some of these schools were built quite a long time ago, and then they're not really set up for handling what we need them to handle.
No.
The other thought I had was, why, and it's not really a question that's for you to answer, but I'll ask you anyway. Why is it that we're saying young children can go back 5 days a week and just have the regular class sizes of 30 up? And then other children can't. I mean, why do you think the government made that distinction?
My cynical brain would say it's because older children are able to take care of themselves if they're learning from home. Younger children need someone to watch them. So I believe it's to help parents get back to work. And again, that's an important consideration. I've conversations with parents, I know how challenging for the self-employed, for the single parent, there are so many people who this has been an extremely challenging time to get through with kids at home. And even if you were lucky enough to work from home with your children there while they're trying to do school, it's been hard. It's been tough. My kids are grown. I didn't have to deal with that, but I've heard the stories. So I understand why it is an absolutely high priority for that to happen. But yeah. I wonder if there were ways to make that happen more safely if there had been more money spent.
Is a decision being made? I guess the question would be: is a decision being made basically for economic reasons that we need to get people back to work, or for public health reasons, or for education reasons? And it's certainly, I think it's a very valid question to ask.
It feels like it's economic, and we talk about that kids need school, and again, I appreciate that. I know their mental health has been suffering. I know they're lonely, they need the activity, but it's not going to, well, it might look more like normal than we thought. But I wonder about the trauma of going back for 2 weeks and then all of a sudden people are sick and you're back at home, and it's scary. Like, I don't know what this will look like. Nobody does, but this does not feel like the most measured approach that could have been taken for elementary.
Cindy, one of the criticisms that I read and I've heard is that there's just a lack of voices at the table. It seems when the government came up with this plan. Would you think that if the teacher unions or more teachers were invited to sit at the planning table, that a different plan would have been tabled instead?
Yes, I do, because there are a lot of little nuances and details. Like, one of the things I'm wondering about, for instance, in elementary, apart from the teaching, I mean, there's a reason I have not been in a restaurant in 5 months and will not go now until I feel more comfortable that it's being done safely. Mm-hmm. But they say eating in a room with people in a closed space is one of the most hazardous things you can do. Where are these kids eating lunch?
Right.
How far apart will they be? Who is supervising that? Because currently, from the best of my knowledge and memory, you had older kids who would patrol the hallways, be the lunchroom monitors. You didn't have adults in the classroom necessarily. Maybe that's changed since I was in elementary. But the teachers have a lunch break too. And if this is a regular, air quote, regular school day, how is lunch being handled safely? Because lunchtime, the masks are off, they're chewing, they're talking more loudly. It's a lot less controlled. So that's one of those things that you don't really think about until you've been in a lunchroom with grade 7s and you've experienced that.
Well, I can't even imagine if you get into like the grade 3, 4, 5, where you try asking that age of children to sit down politely at a small desk for half an hour. Good luck to you.
Yeah. And I mean, my kids went through the system. I remember they were lunchroom monitors and they were the students sitting in the lunchroom, and the stories. I mean, it can be a little bit of organized chaos. So how do you do that?
Well, the other hazard, if I recall, is they're limiting how many outside bodies are allowed in the schools. Like, I don't believe they're going to allow lunchtime monitors or volunteers to go into the schools like they did before. I know that my child's school, they would have parent volunteers sign up for, the fundraisers and the extracurricular activities and the hall room, the school room monitoring and the playground monitoring and things like that, to give teachers a bit of a break for their lunches and for their planning periods and whatnot. But my understanding is those volunteers are not going to be invited back due to safety concerns. And I'm wondering, like, that must be a huge wrench in the plan from a teacher perspective.
Well, that and the whole idea of supply teachers, I can only imagine how badly we'll need supply teachers if people are staying home even at the first sign of anything as we head in. Like, even if it's not COVID, if you've got a sniffle or a fever, you're staying home. So if you're a supply teacher and you're in a school and then that school has a case, are you then off work for 2 weeks because you have to isolate? And are you paid? Because supply teachers are only paid. Does this use up the teacher's sick days? There's been no answers to a lot of those questions.
Well, that's one of the questions that Roland and I were discussing offline was, so we send all the kids back to a regular routine. What happens if a teacher contracts COVID-19? What happens if they come out with a test and they say, yeah, I tested positive. Okay, they go home for 2 weeks. But if that teacher calls into the administration that day and says, I tested positive, I need to stay home, find somebody to come in for 2 weeks, would the system be set up to handle that?
Well, and further to that, if there are 50 contacts for that teacher in the school, Does that mean all 50 of those contacts now
Right.
need to stay home? Because that's generally what's happening. If you're in touch with someone who's diagnosed as having COVID, you are in isolation for 2 weeks. So how do you manage that? I mean, I know in the schools in the States where this has happened, the schools are shut down fairly quickly because you just can't, it's very challenging to track those contacts realistically in a school. So yeah, I don't know that we would have the capacity to do that. And I know that they say they're hiring extra teachers, but it's not the number of extra teachers that we need to cover who knows what kind of absentee rate we're going to be looking at.
Yeah. I mean, when it just the practicalities of one person catching it, or effectively everybody in that class is now your family.
Yes.
One person catches it, you all need to isolate now. Well, okay, so that's just driven a coach and horses to at least one class. Well, what about some of those children? Talk to some of the children in other classes. Well, now you've got to take that class out too. I mean, it just spirals very, very quickly, it seems to me.
Yeah.
And the science is suggesting that kids may not generally get sick, but they certainly get infected and they spread. So it will be very silent at the child level because we won't know they have it. But it's once it starts popping up in the adults where you know you have a problem. And again, I think there was an article in the in Forbes that's a new study that's out about kids spreading. And it's again, the science is so new that we don't really know. We have no idea conclusively what this looks like in kids and how really it spreads in kids.
Well, and there has been some, again, very early, but there have been some reports of, and I can't remember the name of the condition. I should go and look it up on Wikipedia. But a particular reaction that seems to affect some children that is particularly nasty and with potentially long-term effects. So you're to an extent we're experimenting with children, and not to mention the rest of us.
I wonder about, I know the Ministry of Labor protects employees and PPE. They say medical grade masks are being provided to teachers, but I don't believe that means N95. I believe that means the paper mask coverings that you can buy. So if a teacher comes down with this, and the estimates are that you can get quite ill for this from a longer period of time than just the initial sickness. There are significant health repercussions that come later. So what does that look like from an LTD or a long-term disability perspective, or how then there are so many repercussions from that. Teachers have been told that if they aren't able to work, they will be accommodated, but what's the criteria for not being able to work? Is there certain conditions that are okay, you stay home, and others that are not? If you have elderly parents, is that enough? Like we don't even know what the criteria are for you can stay home. And what if half the teachers want to stay home?
I think it would be interesting to hear from the union perspective, both the Catholic and from Electa as well as ETFO and OSSTF, their perspectives on these concerns. Because I'll be honest, Cindy, I never thought about this until you just raised them. I did not think with the long-term disability potential that could affect teachers. If they're contracted, they can recover. But you're right. We're hearing about shortness of breath and liver complications due to COVID-19. And I never thought about that. But you're right. That might be a question for another union negotiation contract talk down the road between the government and the unions, which, well, last time we went through that wasn't such a great experience for the province.
No, it was quite a horrific experience for the province. So,
and just the fact that teachers are being asked to do this with 4 weeks' notice, as you say, really very, I'm still in the mode of thinking September's a long way away. It's right around the corner, and this was basically, I spoke to a trustee the other day. They had no real, they were learning at the same time as the rest of us what was kind of being suggested, and had no more answers to these questions than we do. So it's just being kind of dropped from on high. And I guess to an extent, this goes to the way that this provincial government has kind of operated since day one, that it tends not to consult, and I think that's a fair criticism to make. But things like this, it's like you got to speak to people. You got to find out the people who are actually in the room how this is going to work out.
Yes, but I think the reality is they were very aware of the fact that it would be incredibly expensive to do this. Apart from just the busing, all the kids on the bus, how do you bus all of those students if you're staggering the busing and spreading them out appropriately on the busing? So that there are so many, it's a very expensive proposition. And I get that, but I wonder if the repercussions of this, I'm picturing, you go to if you have a summer camp where 75% of the kids test positive after 2 weeks, and all of those kids, so maybe it's not that high, maybe it's 25%. So 25% go home. They're being babysat after school by grandparents, or their own parents are there. They have siblings. How quickly are we right back where we were in March and April? It feels very, apart from the teacher risk, it feels very dangerous, and it's a little frustrating that this could be the thing that turns the clock back for us after so much work and so much effort to get to where we are. And we're still not through it by any stretch, but that it could be taken backwards so quickly.
On that note, if we do get the infamous second wave that everyone is saying we are going to be getting, and we do end up having to go back into lockdown, worst case scenario, your experience, Cindy, with going into the distance learning, the online learning, how quickly were you able to get set up for that, and B, what did you like or not like about it?
I think teachers will be much better prepared for that this time. There were a lot of teachers, elementary and secondary, who had never taught online, and it's an entirely new skill set. And I put myself in that category, because much as I would have meetings and whatnot online, teaching students and all of the privacy considerations and all of the limitations about what you are and are not allowed to use in terms of apps, and it was a huge learning curve. So the hours and hours and hours that I know people spent trying to pivot to that, I think will serve them well when they go back, because they will be that much better prepared. And I do think I think they have expected that while we might be back face to face, even in May, June, we were saying we'll be back face to face, but it will probably at some point in some areas be back online. It's just to be expected. So I believe people are planning for that, and I think we'll be in a better position for that. There is a concern about equity, because what really was brought to light through all of this for the teachers was that their students do not have equitable access to technology, to quiet spaces to learn, to access to materials, to Wi-Fi, to things that some people take for granted. And it was surprising for people to hear what was not available to many students. So how do you do that? How do you support students who are in that situation? The difference will be, last year it was the mark stand. As of March 13th in secondary, your mark is your mark. That will not be the case in September.
Right.
So that will be a different dynamic that I think will change student engagement. And I think we were all a little bit in shock, or a lot in shock, in March and April. That has passed. This is the new normal, and I think people are, they've learned to adjust to this. So.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Cindy, for speaking with us today. I suspect we could go on for another half an hour here, quite easily. But I think your experience is enormously valuable to hear, and so many questions, to say the least, that haven't been answered yet. That really need to be answered very quickly if we're going to do this right at all, and if this plan, such as it is going to be put into effect. So thank you again, and we're hoping certainly to speak to sort of other, I guess the word is stakeholders in the process in the weeks ahead. But thanks so much for giving us perhaps the most important perspective, which is of the people who are actually going to be in the classrooms.
Oh, my pleasure.
Well, that was great. As our first interview on the 9 to 5 podcast, what do you think, Joel?
Well, it was very informative. I thought that I think the general consensus is we're having more questions being asked than we're getting answers over this whole reopening. I thought Cindy brought up a few points that I honestly had not even considered. But again, just makes us ask more questions and needing more answers, that this really can't be done kind of at the last minute, which I think this consensus is from parents and apparently as well from teachers, is that that's what the approach is from the provincial government.
It seems to me, I mean, obviously I have less skin in this game than many people. It seems to me that something of this level of complexity, they've just said, okay, well, we need to go back now, so back we go. We'll make do with some masks and for those that can wear them, and away we go. And it just seems so incredibly kind of superficial.
Well, it kind of, I mean, it just seems like we just kind of gave up on any rules or guidelines that we had been putting in place for the last 6 months now. My numbers might be off that one. But I mean, it's kind of like you say, like, maybe we didn't even need to shut down the schools in the first place. Just could have told everyone, hey, just put a mask on your face and good luck to you. And the other aspect that we didn't cover, but it popped up in my news feeds, that the Ontario government announced as well that the daycares are going to be returning September 1st to full capacity registration, which again is a scary notion to some parents, is that we just seem to be there's no guidelines on restructuring how these places are going to operate. It's just pretty much, no, we're just going to go back to normal and good luck to you. It seems to be the government policy.
And it comes back to the thing that I felt to an extent throughout the opening up process, that we made a decision as a society in March to deliberately damage our economy to save lives. It's like, this is going to hurt, but it's worth doing. Well, if it was worth doing in March, why is it not still worth doing now? The damage has been done to the economy to an extent. I mean, you totally get the pressure to go back to work, and I mean, most of us are working in some way now. I don't think there's, well, we are going back to work, and the economy is returning to something like normal. But
the big, I mean, everybody's comparing this to the fact that you can go to a restaurant that will have less than 50 people, in some cases far less because of social distancing guidelines. But we're basically saying we'd rather go to a restaurant and drink and eat and do that than take the time to make sure that our schools are safe, they're equipped to handle the complexities of this pandemic. And I just find that we're just not putting forward our best imagination on this. We're not getting the best and brightest in the room together to come up with some new inventive ideas to say, I'm not an either or guy. I don't think we have to present a case of, well, it's either the economy opens or schools open. I think we can have both. The problem is, to do both safely, we need to invest time, resources, and capital to make it happen. And that seems to be something that this government, for whatever reason, whether it's a hubris or ideology or just they don't want to spend the money, just doesn't seem to be wanting to do that.
And if the primary motivation, which is the suspicion is the primary motivation here is economic, about allowing parents to go back to work, then surely that's worth the investment to do it right, rather than trying to cheap out on it.
I just don't understand how the federal government has chipped in billions upon, if not trillions of dollars. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but I mean, we're talking like huge deficits, record-breaking deficits. And I have not heard one person say, well, that was a waste of money. Oh, that was a really boneheaded government plan. Everybody understands you needed to do that to save lives, to keep people safe, to keep an economy on literally on life support. It's nobody asked for this. Nobody asked for it. Nobody's blaming government for saying, oh, why didn't you have a couple $1 trillion sitting in a rainy day fund for this? Nobody saw this coming. So nobody's blaming anybody for spending that money. But I think the fact is, we're realizing if we want to get out of this safely, we're going to have to spend money. We're going to have to start coming up with new and inventive approaches to these problems. It's becoming clear to me, at least, that we're getting back to normal is not necessarily an option. We need to find a new way of sending our kids back to school to get the economy going. And I think we just need to start. We need to start asking different people. And again, going to more, as Cindy said in her interview, getting more people at the table and asking different people to sit down and just see what ideas work.
Yep, absolutely. Well, it'll be interesting to see how all this pans out and whether the plan that was announced is actually the plan that happens in 4 weeks' time.
This is something that we're going to stay on top of. This is clearly not the end of the discussion. We did ask both chairs of the Halton Catholic and the Halton Public boards to come on. Both have indicated that they're interested in doing so, but they wanted to take time to look at their numbers and to examine what their boards can do, which we thought was understandable. So we have the open invitation to them to come on, and we hope that they'll take it up in a few weeks' time. But I think we'll be revisiting this again once the schools actually open and we see how this plan unfolds.
Absolutely. Well, okay. Well, thanks, Joel, again for your partners this week. And just a reminder to everybody that this is going to be a weekly podcast. We're planning Tuesday will be the day when it comes out every week. You can send us your feedback, your corrections, your outraged disagreement, whatever you like, to us by email at info@905er.ca. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/905er.ca. We're on Twitter at @the_905er. And we have a website, which is 905er.ca, that will shortly have the archive of the episodes. You'll be able to go there and subscribe and get notified of new episodes. For those of you who usually are more used to using iTunes or Spotify, we're going to be on there in a few weeks. It takes a little while, but we're working on it. So you should be able to get sort of automatically updated on new episodes as they come out. And in future weeks, we're going to have a bunch of interesting stories hopefully coming up. And make sure you tune in every week to the 905er.
You looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.